I never imagined that a single dinner invitation could shatter everything I believed about family. The call came on a Tuesday afternoon while I was reviewing quarterly reports in my corner office overlooking downtown Seattle. Mom's voice was honey-sweet, almost musical, a tone I hadn't heard in years. "Ryan, sweetheart, come home for dinner this weekend. We haven't seen you in ages." I should have known something was wrong. In my 35 years, my parents had never called just to spend time together. Every interaction had strings attached, a bill that needed paying, a crisis that required my wallet. But some foolish part of me still hoped things could be different. So I canceled my weekend plans. I drove 3 hours from Seattle to their sprawling lakeside mansion in Bellingham, the same house I'd been secretly financing for the past decade, and walked straight into an ambush. The dining room was perfectly set. Crystal glasses caught the light from the antique chandelier. Candles flickered romantically. And the air was thick, with the aroma of Mom's famous pot roast. My younger siblings, Jake and Mia, I were already seated, their faces wearing identical smirks. That should have been my first warning. "Before we eat," Jake announced, leaning back in his chair with theatrical confidence, "Mom and Dad want to clear something up. You know. So there aren't any surprises later." I set down my wine glass, suddenly aware of how quiet the room had become. "Clear what up?" Mom dabbed her lips with a napkin, avoiding my eyes. "Your father and I have finalized our will. The house. The lake property. Our investments. Everything goes to Jake and Mia." The words hit like a physical blow. I turned to Dad, waiting for him to intervene, to say this was some sick joke. Instead, he stared into his wine glass as if it contained all the answers to life's mysteries. "Why?" The word came out barely above a whisper. Jake shrugged, his grin widening. "Because you don't need it. Right, you've got your investment firm. Is your penthouse. Your BMW. Mom and Dad figured Mia and I could use the support more." Support. The word was a knife twisting in my chest. "Support," I laughed. But there was no humor in it. "Mia, you're 28, and you've never held a job longer than 3 months. Jake, how many times did you change majors? 6, 7, and I paid for every single semester." Mia twirled a strand of her blonde hair around her finger, her voice dripping with mock sweetness. "God. Ryan, do you keep track of every dollar? That's so pathetic. You're rich. Why are you being so greedy?" The word greedy hit me like a slap. I looked around the table at the family I'd been supporting financially for over a decade and felt something cold settle in my chest. "Greedy," I stood slowly, my voice dangerously quiet. "I've paid the mortgage on this house for 6 years. When you were facing foreclosure, I took out a loan in my name to save it. I've covered utilities, repairs, Jake's endless college expenses, Mia's designer shopping sprees. I've given up vacations, investments, my own dreams, to keep this family afloat." Mom slammed her hand on the table, making the glasses jump. "Enough. You're always making everything about money. We didn't do this because we don't love you. We love all our children equally." Equally. The laugh that escaped me was bitter. When was the last time Jake or Mia sacrificed anything for this family? When did either of them miss a vacation or drive a used car to help pay your bills? Jake leaned forward, his voice condescending. "You're acting like a child whose toy got taken away. We're adults here." "Ryan." Time to accept reality. That's when it hit me. The truth I'd been too blind to see. I wasn't their son. I was their ATM. A walking bank account they could tap whenever they needed cash, then discard when it was no longer convenient. I placed my hands flat on the table, feeling the smooth wood beneath my palms. When I looked up, my expression was ice cold. "You're right. Jake, It is time to accept reality. I stood, pushing back my chair. Reality is that I've been paying for this lifestyle while you all took credit for it. Reality is that not one of you has ever said thank you. Reality is that I'm done. Mum's face went pale. What do you mean? Me done? I mean, I'm cutting off all financial support. The mortgage payments. The utilities. Jake's monthly allowance. Mia's credit card bills. All of it stops now. The room erupted. Jake shot to his feet. His face flushed with anger. You can't just abandon your family. Watch me. I walked toward the door. But Mom's voice stopped me cold. If you walk out that door, I don't think you can come back when you change your mind. I turned. Meeting her desperate gaze, I won't be coming back. The drive home to Seattle was a blur of taillights and bitter thoughts. Back in my penthouse, I poured myself a scotch and opened my banking applet. $2,000 a month in automatic payments to my family, money that had been flowing from my account to theirs for years without question. With steady fingers, I canceled every single recurring payment. The notifications came almost immediately. Payment canceled successfully. Each confirmation felt like breaking another link in the chain that had bound me to their manipulation. The first call came at 7 a.m. the next morning. Mom's name flashed on my screen. I declined it. The second call came 5 minutes later. Then a third. By noon, she'd called 17 times. Finally, she left a voicemail. Ryan, I can't believe you're doing this. How can you be so selfish? Family helps family. Call me back. Dad's call came that afternoon. His message was shorter but equally tone-deaf, son. Your mother is very upset. You need to reconsider. We're family. Family. The word had lost all meaning. Mia's texts arrived like a barrage of poisoned darts. You're such a selfish asshole. Ryan, hope you're happy destroying the family. You think you're better than us, newsflash, you're not. Jake's approach was more direct. He called and I actually answered. What the hell is wrong with you? He screamed into the phone. You cut off Mom and Dad because they didn't leave you money in their will. You're disgusting. This isn't about the inheritance. Jake, it's about respect, which I've never gotten from any of you. You're a parasite. He spat. You think you can just abandon your family without consequences. We'll see about that. The line went dead, and I felt a chill run down my spine. I knew Jake well enough to know this wasn't over. I was right. I discovered what Jake meant about consequences when I returned home from work on Friday evening. My apartment door was sealed shut, with industrial foam thick. Gray. Hardened, cement-like substance that had been sprayed over every inch of the frame and keyhole. Rage flowed through my veins like molten metal. I pulled out my phone and opened the building's security app, scrolling back through the afternoon footage until I found what I was looking for. There he was, Jake, in a gray hoodie and baseball cap, grinning as he sprayed foam across my door with the methodical precision of someone who thought he was teaching me a lesson. I saved the video, took photos of his handiwork, and called the police. The officer who responded was professional but skeptical. You want to press charges against your brother, former brother? I corrected. And yes, I absolutely do. Dad called the next morning. His voice strained. Ryan, does it really have to go this far? Jake was just upset. He didn't mean any harm. He sealed my door. Dad, what if I'd had a medical emergency? What if there'd been a fire? Silence. He thought intimidation would work. I continued. He was wrong. What do you want to drop the charges? The question I'd been waiting for? $40,000. Door repair. Legal fees. And compensation for the inconvenience? That's extortion. No. Dad, those are consequences. Something this family has never had to face before. Within 3 days, exactly $40,000 appeared in my account. Not a single word of apology accompanied the transfer. No acknowledgement from Mom, Dad, Jake, or Mia that what Jake did was wrong. Just payment. As if money could fix everything, which, in their minds, it always had. But I wasn't satisfied with just the money. I wanted them to understand that their version of events wasn't the only one that mattered. I opened Facebook for the first time in months and began typing. For 10 years, I financially supported my family. I paid their mortgage, their bills, my siblings' college tuition, and their living expenses without complaint. I believed family meant mutual support and love. When my parents decided to leave their entire inheritance to my siblings, citing that I didn't need it because I had a career, I asked why my decade of sacrifice wasn't worth consideration. They called me selfish and greedy. When I stopped funding their lifestyle, they called me a traitor and abandoned them. My brother vandalized my apartment as retaliation. Now they're spreading lies that I heartlessly abandoned poor, struggling parents. The truth: they haven't lost their home. They've lost their free ride. This post isn't for sympathy. It's for anyone who's been used by family members who mistake your love for weakness. Setting boundaries isn't betrayal. Refusing to be exploited isn't abandonment. Sometimes the family you choose is worth more than the one you're born into. I hit publish and watched as the post exploded across social media. Hundreds of shares, thousands of comments, some supportive like Tation, some critical, but all of them spreading the truth they'd tried to hide. Mom called within hours, her voice shaking with rage. "How dare you humiliate us publicly?" I told the truth. "Mom, if that humiliates you, maybe you should examine your actions. You'll regret this." She hissed before hanging up, but I didn't regret it. For the first time in years, I felt free. Months passed in blissful silence. No guilt trip calls. No emergency financial requests. No manipulation, disguised as family obligation. I threw myself into my work, expanded my investment firm, and began living the life I'd put on hold for so long. I traveled to Tokyo, where I'd always wanted to go but never had the time or money that had been flowing to my family instead. I bought the Rolex I'd been admiring for years, took up sailing, and even started dating again without the constant drain of family drama. Through mutual friends, I heard updates about my former family's situation. Mom had taken a job at a local restaurant, her first real job in 20 years. Dad was working construction. Jake had moved back home after failing to launch yet another startup without my financial backing. Mia was working retail and complaining constantly about not being able to afford her old lifestyle. They were experiencing, perhaps for the first time, the actual consequences of their choices. I felt no guilt. I'd given them opportunities, support, and unconditional love for years. They'd repaid it with entitlement, manipulation, and betrayal. The struggling they were doing now was simply the natural result of losing their financial safety net, a safety net they'd taken completely for granted. A year later, I met Elena at a business conference in San Francisco. She was brilliant, successful in her own right, and most importantly, she saw me as a partner, not a provider. When I told her my story, she didn't judge me for cutting off my family. She admired my strength in finally setting boundaries. "You can't build a healthy future on the foundation of toxic relationships," she said, and I knew she was right. We married 2 years later, in a small ceremony surrounded by friends and colleagues, people who valued me for who I was, not what I could give them. My biological family wasn't invited, and I didn't miss them for a second. Standing on the balcony of our new home, watching the sunset over Puget Sound, I reflected on how that dinner invitation had changed everything. What I'd initially seen as the worst betrayal of my life had actually been my liberation. My family's greed had given me something I'd never had before: the freedom to choose who deserved my love. loyalty, and support. And I'd chosen wisely. They'd taught me that blood doesn't always make family, and sometimes the best thing you can do for yourself is walk away from people who only love what you can do for them, not who you are. I never got that inheritance, but I got something far more valuable, my life back. What do you think about Ryan's decision? Have you ever had to cut ties with toxic family members? Share your thoughts and experiences in the comments below. Story 2. It's a family-only Thanksgiving. Mom contacted me to locate another tea spot. As they came to Tabella's restaurant, I saw from my office. I then canceled the Thompson reservation by calling the management. My name is Evelyn Marlowe, and I am 31 years old. 20 minutes later, my mother phoned and said, "Why won't they seat us? 2 days before to Thanksgiving." On a Tuesday morning, I was sitting in my office with a holiday staffing chart laid out on my desk and a cup of cold coffee when the text came. In preparation for one of the busiest days of the year, I had been managing the operations of Thompson Culinary Holdings, which included 7 restaurants, 2 catering businesses, and around 200 staff. My mother sent the brief, piercing message, which felt like a dagger against flesh. "Evelyn, this year's Thanksgiving will be family only. Look for another place to eat." The actual family is the only one with a reservation at Bella's Arcals. Mom. My chest constricted as if a hand had been squeezed tightly against it as I read the sentences again. Only family. The actual family. A part of me had prepared for the words, yet they still hurt, as if she believed that being honest was what made her powerful. My mother always had a way of cutting with casual harshness. It wasn't careless this time. However, it was a purposeful exile. I entered our reservation system and typed Thompson with trembling fingers. On the screen, the irony grinned back at me. Thompson's 12-person party. Talk at 4 p.m. on Thursday. Private eating space. Under Mrs. Thompson's name. A fine Christmas meal. Wine pairings. And seasonal flower arrangements were reserved. She had decided to have her lavish family party at Bella's, my flagship restaurant, the crown jewel of my enterprise. After excluding me from Thanksgiving dinner, I sat silently for a long time, the ridiculousness weighing me down like a burden. No one in my family knew that the restaurant they wanted to show off was really mine, or that the trip they had so excitedly booked was made possible by the daughter they wrote off as a failure. I reclined in my chair and gazed at the dining floor below through the large glass window. Energy surged through the area. Chefs moving in a balletic manner. Glasses are polished by servers until they shine. The smells of fresh bread, garlic, and rosemary filled the kitchen. Bella's was a live example of my perseverance, my sacrifices, and my hard nights. But to them, I was simply Evelyn, a law school dropout who went after ridiculous food trucks. Once again, my phone buzzed. My general manager, Marcus. I spoke in his usual kind and businesslike manner. "Evelyn, good morning. For the big week, are you prepared?" I took a deep breath before responding. "Marcus, we must talk about the Thursday reservation for Thompson, a private dining area for a company of 12. Of course. The premium bundle was what they asked for. When your mother made the reservation, she seemed rather thrilled, said that the family party would be ideal. My chest knot became harder. The ideal family gathering sans me. Please cancel the reservation for me," Mark espoused. And I could hear it. Cancel. It's Tuesday. Evelyn, Thanksgiving is only 2 days away. I am aware. Almost a $3. 000 reservation. They order the meal. The employees were allocated. The space was furnished. The reservation must be canceled. But I will reimburse the expenses I incur. He lowered his voice. Could you tell me why is there a payment problem? It's a private issue. Tell Mrs. Thompson over the phone that Bella is unable to host their party. There was a pause before he spoke once again. This time, more slowly. You understand that it will be quite difficult for them to obtain a table for 12 on Thanksgiving. A sour chuckle arose in my throat. They'll find a solution. I'm sure. I stood at the window once again after the conversation ended. Pre-Christmas anticipation was in the air at the eatery. Unaware of the personal drama taking place behind their employer's composed demeanor, my employees walked with assurance. I was seen by them as a leader, a builder, and someone who had made it from a food truck to a Michelin star to my family. However, I was a mistake. A tale they never proudly shared. Michael, my elder brother, is a well-known attorney. Ashley, my younger sister, is a nurse with 2 kids and a decent life. Presented at dinner parties. Their names were polished like silver and served as my parents' trophy. And I was the daughter who worked in kitchens late at night, on the weekends. And on holidays, the one who never got married and who never provided them with the straightforward success story they so desperately wanted. They believed that my decisions diminished me. They were unaware that my less had developed into more than they could have ever imagined. 200 people that relied on me. $12 million in yearly income. And an empire they had never thought to inquire about. Marcus returned the call half an hour later. I got to your mom. Evelyn. Disappointed. She insisted on having a direct conversation with the owner. I gave myself permission to grin a little. You told her that there was a schedule difficulty? In the private dining room. I informed her that we were completely booked when she inquired about the main dining room. Excellent. She said that her family was traveling in for their vacation, and this was destroying everything. She was furious. I said, I'm sure she was. Marcus paused and lowered his voice. Could I ask you a question? Evelyn, why are you calling off the meal with your own family? For a time. I gazed at the ceiling, hoping the response wouldn't shatter me. Marcus said it was for family only, since they had not invited me. You are family. Even if he was silent back then. Not the appropriate type. Apparently. Later, texts from siblings buzzed across my phone. Mom told me about Thanksgiving. Ashley, are you all right? Would you rather visit our home, Michael? This year, Mom wants to keep things simple. Dad, don't be upset about that. She was anxious about the plans. Every sentence served as a bandage for an injury. Shallow consolation that steered clear of the brutality at its core. Mom wanted me to be away. None of them would argue with her, even though they all knew it was wrong. I choose to disregard the signals. Already, my heart was hammering with a steely pace. I wouldn't close this year by silently accepting their criticism as I always do. I knew the call would come when it did. My mom's voice faltered. Something awful occurred. Evelyn, 2 days before to Thanksgiving. Bella's canceled our reservation. Is it not unbelievable to stop myself from giggling? I bit the inside of my cheek. Oh gosh. It is terrible. Which eatery Bella's? It was flawless. Everything was planned. But now it's a mess. Uncle Roberts is coming in via plane. Mary, your cousin, drove from Phoenix. Everyone was on their way. You work in restaurants. Evelyn, are you aware of anybody who might assist us in locating a classy location? I gazed at the ceiling light. The irony almost blinding me. I had just been left out. But now my mother was requesting that I preserve her vacation. I carefully mentioned, I may know some folks. What kind of location are you seeking? Somewhere spectacular. Robert boasts about his kids. You know, we wanted to let the family know how great we're doing. Bella had the ideal one. So exclusive. 3 stars. We couldn't wait to announce to everyone that we would be eating there. I gripped the phone more tightly. Amazing. Exclusive. Exclusive. Excellent. No mention of love. No mention of family. I told her to let me see what I could do. I had a burning notion in my chest as I hung up. Pain and resolution are equal parts. Perhaps it was time for me to take the stage if my family wanted to see me perform. It was time for the curtain to raise. My phone was buzzing on my desk, like a restless bug for the remainder of that Tuesday. Suddenly feeling apprehensive and conscious of the impending storm around Thanksgiving, my relatives began contacting me. Every communication had the same tone. Evasion mixed with concern, as if they wanted to seem sympathetic without running the risk of offending my mother. Ashley was the first to text. I heard about Thanksgiving from Mom. Are you all right? Instead, would you like to visit our home? My stomach twisted as I gazed at it for a while. Ashley had good intentions. She did it every time. However, there was no sign of anger or fury that our mother had written me off as not being a member of the family, like crumbs scraped off a table. It was only an offering. Visit our home? Second option. Secondly, Michael's message followed. This year, Mom wants to keep things simple. Easy. I thought of the term like a funny joke. Leaving out a daughter wasn't easy. It was a plan. The unpleasantness disappeared behind tidy terminology because my brother, the lawyer, always found a way to frame things. Dads were last. Your mom is under stress. Don't be upset about it. I chuckled sharply, and without amusement. What other way could I accept it? The old pain of being misinterpreted returned as I listened to what they had to say. I was seen by them as the dropout who didn't stick to the plan. I was the black sheep that swapped courtrooms for food trucks. As the cautionary story, they never inquired as to what those vehicles had turned into. They were never interested in learning how I created kitchens out of nothing, how I led teams while feeling like I was on fire. The reality? I had missed many anniversaries and birthdays. I was fighting for something greater than myself. Not because I didn't care. I was elbows deep in dough, honing recipes, haggling with suppliers, and mentoring new cooks who had faith in me as they drank champagne at family meals. My efforts created bellows and created a culinary empire out of nothing. My mother's voice continued to reverberate. However, only family. The city lights outside my workplace glistened on the glass that night. With restless energy pulsing through me, I remained up late, taking notes. I was more than simply wounded for the first time in years. I was upset. Anger sharper than the blades I'd handled in crowded food trucks. With a flavor that was nearly electric, my phone rang once more. I almost dismissed it. But I snatched it up when I saw the word Mom. False sweetness made her voice shake. I'm so happy you responded. Evelyn, we're stuck in a horrible situation. We have nothing anymore. And Bellows was flawless. Are you aware of the humiliating nature of it? Uncle Robert will arrive via plane tomorrow. Mary, your cousin, is already traveling. It is impossible for us to inform them that there is no plan. Are you able to assist us? You have to be connected. I forced my voice to be calm by pressing my lips together. I may know a few individuals. But why did you initially choose family exclusively? Mom and uncomfortable. Heavy pause. All we wanted to do was keep things easy. Easy. I left the term lingering. Am I not a member of the family you work so much? But of course you are. My love, you miss a lot of meals. We assumed you would feel more at ease working alone, doing what I want to do. I suppressed the resentment that sprang in my throat. Or was it your desire to win Uncle Robert over? She became agitated. What are you trying to say? Perhaps you believed my presence would detract from the picture. There was a long pause. Then she let out a tired sigh. Evelyn, you don't get it. In law, your brother is doing quite well. Robert constantly contrasts the accomplishments of his children. And Ashley has a lovely family. It's draining. All I wanted was for the night to be spectacular. Her words were acrid. And you believed it would be more remarkable if I wasn't included. That's not how I meant it. You did. I muttered. That's precisely what you meant. She begged me to make some calls as we finished the conversation on a sour tone. I only promised to see what I could do. I roamed my office thereafter, thinking sharply and jangly. There was more to this than a meal. This has to do with years of rejection and how my family constructed a story in which I was always the outsider. I could feel my ribcage being compressed by the weight of their criticism. But behind that, determination was aroused by something else. They believed I had no authority. They believed me to be a food truck-clinging, failed idealist. They were unaware that I owned the food they so dearly wanted, and the very ground under their feet. I took out old photos that evening. I was standing in front of my first vehicle, smiling tiredly, wearing an apron with a flower streak, a younger version of me. Her eyes full of determination, despite the oil sticking to her clothing. That girl had been seen as a joke by my family. They were never able to see her change. The irony was sweet now. They were pleading for assistance. And the daughter they abandoned provided it. The Wednesday morning, the number of calls had grown. Ashley's voice was tight with concern when she left a message. Mom is in a panic. She's calling everywhere. Evelyn, there isn't room for 12 persons. She's in tears. I'm not sure. But could you maybe get in touch with some of your contacts? Fix this. I were the unsaid remarks that I could almost hear. But why should I save us? Something inside of me wanted to let them run. Allow the supper to fall into chain eateries or fast food. Allow Uncle Robert to see the imperfections in the flawless exterior. Another side. More subdued, but determined. Realized this was my opportunity. To be noticed. Not merely to assist. To make them confront the reality they had been ignoring for years. I called Marcus. On the first ring, he responded. Has my mom phoned me back? Evelyn grimly. He muttered 3 times, each time sounding more desperate than the previous. She inquired whether we had any recommendations for other eateries. To be honest, everything is scheduled. But I provided her names. She almost burst into tears. Tears. I let out a calm breath and closed my eyes. I reminded myself that my mother was a bad person. Simply shallow, image-obsessed, and conceited in ways that wounded more than she knew. She hadn't intentionally left me out. She had left me out of embarrassment. With a firm voice now, I added, Marcus. That truth cut deeper than hatred. Suppose we return the reservation to them. He paused. Do you want to bring it back? Yes. But with one modification. What has changed? The group of 12 turns into a group of 13. Over the line. His breath caught in his throat. Are you saying that you'll be going with them? Indeed. After you are not invited. That's right. He remained silent for a while after I told him. If they want their perfect dinner, they'll have to make room for me. That's daring. Then, it's essential. I had an odd sense of tranquility as I hung up the phone. I had let their opinions to define me for years. But I wouldn't be invisible this Thanksgiving. They were setting up the stage, and I was taking center stage, whether my family approved or not. The city was alive with the excitement of the holiday on Wednesday night. Stores were packed with last-minute shopping, and the streets were glistening with early lights. Nevertheless, time seemed to stop inside my office, knowing that the next action might alter everything. I sat by myself and stared at my phone. They had already made up their minds. On my conditions, as my family would be able to reclaim their priceless supper. When my mother eventually answered the phone, her voice was desperate. Tell me you discovered anything. Evelyn, everything is reserved. It's unbelievable that Bellis would cancel in such a manner. It's embarrassing. Tomorrow, Robert will come. And Mom, gently interrupted. I may be of assistance. On her end, the quiet was piercing with hope. Really, can you? You'd be rescuing us. Evelyn, how I stated carefully. I have some contacts. There is a person I know who might be influential at Bellis. Evelyn. Oh, that would be amazing. You save lives. What must we accomplish? I mentioned one requirement. Her breath caught. I could hear my own heartbeat in the eerie calm that followed. Condition. Yes. The reservation will be for 13 people. Not 12. 13. She finally murmured. But who would the 13th be? Me? I said. No yell could drown out the ensuing silence. When it did come, my mother's voice sounded strained. We simply imagined you'd be too busy. Evelyn. I thought, I'm family, whether I'm busy. She took a short breath, and I imagined her pacing the kitchen floor as I replied. And if Bellis reopens that dining room for you, then I will be seated at that table. Her pride and terror were battling in her chest as she held the phone to her ear. Robert often boasts about his kids. So we thought, you thought I'd spoil the picture I concluded for her. Evelyn. This dinner. It's important. We wanted to show the family that we're doing well. I answered in a calm but firm voice. No. Sweetheart. That's not. It's exactly that. So, here's the deal. 13 people or none at all. We hung up, and I sat in the dim light of my office, staring at the city skyline. That's the only way you'll walk into Bella's tomorrow night. Her breath trembled over the line. Then soft. All right. Shisen. A strange satisfaction unfolded in my chest. But it wasn't triumph. But something darker. Heavier. For the first time, my mother was negotiating with me, as not dismissing me. Good, I said. I'll make some calls. Marcus gently knocked before entering my restaurant, saying, You wanted to see me, I nodded. I'm reinstating the Thompson reservation party of 13 this time. The irony was so thick that it felt unreal. My mother, who had decided that I wasn't worthy of family, Thanksgiving, was pleading with me for access to my own restaurant. His eyebrows lifted. But he didn't ask. They'll sit in that room and eat tomorrow. And for the first time, they'll see me clearly. Marcus studied me cautiously. Evelyn, how do you want them to know? I met his eyes. Not yet. Not all at once. Tonight, they just think I pulled strings. Tomorrow, they'll find out. Thank you. Consider it done. I'll change the order and staffing. Thank you. After he left, I stayed by the window, remembering the years in the truck, waking up before dawn to chop vegetables in freezing air, the nights I collapsed on stiff mattresses and borrowed apartments, wondering if I'd made the worst mistake of my life. He nodded slowly, as if he understood that I was no longer talking about logistics, but about years of silence and dismissal, all boiling toward a single evening. Ashley called late that night, despite the mockery, my mother's sighs, my father's tired appearance, and Michael's arrogant jokes about gourmet tacos. I had believed in myself and had built. Now, Bella shined like a gem, with 3 Michelin stars crowning what they used to call a fantasy. When they walked through those doors tomorrow, they wouldn't be able to dismiss me anymore. Mom was frantic, saying, You worked a miracle. Her tone, in contrast to Mom's, expressed real concern. Evelyn, is it true? Did you get the reservation back? I responded simply, Oh, thank God. I'm not sure how you did that, but thank you. Her expression of appreciation made me smile. But below it, I felt the same blind spot as before. They didn't know I was the miracle. Did it ever bother you that Mom called it family only? I asked Ashley in a low voice. There was a pause. It did. Of course. But she's like that. It wasn't a literal statement. She excluded me with sufficient sincerity. Ashley sighed, her voice laden with remorse. I just didn't want to exacerbate the situation. That was my family's tale. They all let things be horrible because none of them wanted to make it worse. After the conversation ended, I sat in the dark while my reflection was painted on the glass by the city lights. I assumed there would be more than supper tomorrow. Theater. That is, Uncle Robert needed the ideal image. According to my family, they wouldn't own the picture, but I would offer them one. For once, it would be mine. I wouldn't be the background's forgotten daughter. I would be the truth they couldn't avoid. The revelations seated at the head of the table. I spoke statements that no one else could hear into the empty room. As midnight drew closer, they will find out whose home they are really eating in tomorrow. The morning before Thanksgiving was gloomy and agitated. One of those days when the sky is so low, you can feel it. By 8:00 a.m., Bella's kitchen was already bustling with activity. Chefs moving with accuracy that comes from weeks of preparation. Steam rising from boiling pots, and blades clattering on chopping boards. I silently moved across the floor, absorbing everything. This was my empire in action. My reign. However, it would serve as a stage for a drama tonight, in which my family was not even aware that they were involved. My phone rang in the middle of the morning. It was, of course, Mom. She spoke with artificial brightness. Once again, Evelyn, I appreciate you pulling strings. In fact, Bella has given us back our place. I'm not sure how you did that, but it's quite amazing. You're great. She gave such cheesy compliments. I almost laughed. I was too embarrassed and too busy to sit at her table a week ago. I was incredible now. I replied. I'm glad it worked out. In a firm voice, I informed your dad. You must know a really significant person. Who is it? The supervisor, the cook. I waited for a bit before responding. Someone having power. She chuckled nervously. Thank God you do. Then, it would have been disastrous. Otherwise, when Robert, who is already in town, learned that we would be eating here, he was impressed. He often boasts about his daughter, an investment banker, and his son, a physician. This was our opportunity to demonstrate that we're doing equally well. You know, she said, bragging rights. Not joy about being together. Not excitement about sharing a holiday. And it hit me like stones in my chest. Just a picture. Mom, I whispered quietly. Have you ever questioned why you don't boast about me? She paused. That's unfair. Isn't it? Evelyn Ashley's family. Michael's legal profession? Like trophies. You show them out. To you? What am I? After a lengthy silence. There was silence. You're unique. Not the same. The term that I had spent my whole life living under was like a kind of knife. Soon after, her voice became harsh with defensiveness. And we hung up. Mine cools, resolutely. My siblings began texting by the afternoon. As usual. Michael is practical. Save Thanksgiving. Mom says, thank you for anything you've done. His speech was businesslike, impersonal, and effective. Ashley softened. I'm pleased you'll be joining us tonight. Without you, it wouldn't seem right. I was somewhat calmed by her genuineness. But only at 3:00. Sharp. Marcus showed up at my office. Everything is prepared. There is a private dining room. Employee prepared. At 4 o'clock. The Thompsons will arrive. I straightened my jacket and responded. Good. He looked at me thoughtfully. You know you don't have to do this. You may as well let them eat. Let them go. Don't reveal your secret. I looked him in the eye. Marcus. No. The secret ends tonight. The Thompson family showed up around 4:00. They streamed in, and I observed from the shadows of the dining room entry, Michael wearing a fitted suit, Ashley holding a little child on one hip. Dad seemed pleased, despite his weariness. Mom is beaming with delight. They marveled at Bella's private dining room's beauty, the polished wood, and the chandeliers. Then they noticed me. Mom forced a grin after blinking in surprise. Here you are. Evelyn. I'm stepping forward. I said. Remember C13, as I sat down at the large table with them. There was silence. My siblings looked at each other doubtfully. But nobody said anything. The hush was finally broken by Uncle Robert. A tall, commanding man with a loud voice. It's nice to see you. Evelyn. These days. What do you do? Food trucks are still being tweaked. His tone was kind. But the words were like a smack. A had no malicious intent. He just had no idea. I gave a little grin. That kind of stuff. Forced niceties kicked off dinner. Fine china clattered against silverware as wine was poured into crystal cups. Discussions centered on Ashley's kids, Michael's cases, and Robert's constant bragging about his own. Even at my own table, I remained silent and listened to the stranger. Robert then turned around to face me. And you tell us more. Evelyn, I saw your mother tense, her fork halting in midair as she remarked. You helped secure this reservation. That must mean you have powerful friends in the industry. She didn't think I would be in the limelight so quickly. I replied, allowing the words to sink in. I do. Not the way you think. However, Michael gave a little laugh. Evelyn. Hurry up. Avoid being enigmatic. Who are you acquainted with? A wine supplier. A maitre, I purposely put down my glass. The owner is someone I know. The table became still. Mom laughed too soon. She is acquainted with the owner. Indeed. We were able to get back in that way. I responded, sharpening my voice. No. The owner is me. The ensuing hush was deep. Forks froze in mid-mouth. The eyes became wide. Disbelief clouded the air. You, Robert inquired. Unable to believe it. Bella's is yours. I steadily maintained eye contact. Yes. I do. Bella's. 6 other eateries. And 2 catering businesses. Together. They have more than 200 employees. We made $12 million last year. Michael blinked. Ashley opened her mouth. With a low clink, Dad put down his drink. And the color left Mom's face. I thought, she said in a whisper. I believed that you were still working for food trucks. Equally, I answered, that was the beginning of it. But you didn't inquire as to what it turned into. Now there was more quiet. Coiling through it was shame. I saw the fissure extending across my mother's well-crafted persona. She had carried the tale of her troubled, outspoken daughter for years. And now, that lie had fallen apart in front of Robert and everyone else. It was Robert who recovered first. Amazing, he replied, his voice booming once again. A vehicle turned into an empire. I respect that type of grit. Margaret, you must be very proud. Mom's hands shook against her handkerchief as she swallowed. Yes, she responded in a low voice. I am. Indeed. However, as her eyes met mine, they were filled with a storm rather than pride. Remorse. Or shame. And a hint of terror. The atmosphere had shifted. Yet the supper went on. Some of my siblings looked at me with curiosity, while others were uneasy. Robert was so pleased that he asked me a lot of questions. With every response I provided, my mother's facade crumbled as she sat in brittle stillness. Her voice broke as she finally leaned toward me when dessert came. "Why didn't you tell us?" "Evelyn," I faced her and looked her in the eye. "Because you didn't inquire." Tears threatened to well up in her eyes. "I was mistaken." "Yes," I answered quietly. "Were you around us?" The table was alive with chatter, but there was nothing but quiet between us. A quiet that conveyed everything. It wasn't about the meal tonight. There was no reason to celebrate. It was about the naked, indisputable truth being finally brought into the open. And this was the reality. The one person she could no longer ignore was her daughter, whom she had previously considered a letdown. It was difficult to ignore the discovery, which hung in the air like smoke, as my mother pushed herself to accept the reality. I saw her countenance change from one of astonishment to one of denial to grudging recognition. She had been telling family for years that I was still exploring and that I was finding my path. She was now sitting at a 3-star restaurant that was owned by the same company that she had sacked. Uncle Robert's loud voice cut through the tension as he sat back in his chair. "Evelyn, this is fantastic. Really. Beginning with nothing and creating everything. The American dream is that..." He offered a toast by lifting his glass. But the gesture simply made our table feel more awkward. Ashley gave me a shy grin, as if she was only learning about me. But Michael's jaw tightened as he moved in his seat. He was used to being the center of attention and the success story that his mother presented at every event. Robert now appeared like a guy watching his crown fall away. His adulation aimed directly at me. With a tight voice, he eventually remarked, "I didn't know you were doing that well. 12 million eateries. It's impressive. Amazing." Almost as an afterthought, the word landed, hollow and reluctant. I leaned a little forward. "Michael, you may have known. If you had ever asked, any one of you could have." He averted his gaze while tinkering with his glass's stem. Every mouthful of the meal seemed like a performance. Discussions veered back and forth between Ashley's kids and Michael's cases before coming back to me. Robert is insatiably curious. 7 eateries. Do you oversee all of them yourself? How can quality be balanced? How about investors? I had the opportunity to reveal to them what they had chosen not to notice with each inquiry. And every response made me feel both validated and sad. Confirmation that they at last saw my value. I'm sorry, it had to be earned with dollar signs. Robert once turned to face my mom. As a daughter who turned a food truck into an empire, "Margaret, you must be quite proud. It requires vision." Her voice was harsh. "Herr Grin Regit. I'm proud. Of course." However, her eyes, which flickered with humiliation, betrayed her. At last, I addressed her directly. "Do you know what occurred here?" "Mom, you were so humiliated that you didn't invite me to Thanksgiving dinner. Then, without realizing that I was supposed to serve the supper, you pleaded with me to preserve it. And now that Robert thinks highly of me, you sit here being arrogant?" The table became still. Ashley muttered, "Evelyn." However, I raised a hand. "No." I just shouted it louder. "It's time for us to quit acting. You believed that I was failing. You believed me to be less. You concluded that I wasn't welcome at this table as a result." Mom's lip quivered. "Please, Evelyn, now is not the moment. You can't take your eyes off me for once." So that's precisely when I interrupt. I can't be reduced to a footnote in the family saga for once. The words were weighty. Dad cleared his throat. His voice rumbled deep. "Your mother just didn't get it. Evelyn, we didn't. However, tonight shows how mistaken we were. His peacemaking effort seemed insincere. Comprehending after the event did not equate to forgiveness. At last, Michael lost it. There was a protective edge to his speech. Mom doesn't boast about you. And you can't blame her for that. She was unaware. You concealed it. I spoke steadily as I turned to face him. Did I? Or did you not inquire? You thought it didn't important. Therefore, you never wanted to hear about my job. Ashley had tears welling up in her eyes. You're right, she muttered. We didn't inquire. The ensuing hush was cruel. My mom's napkin was torn to pieces by her hands. It caused her poise to disintegrate. Uncle Robert attempted to lighten the atmosphere, perhaps anticipating the impending storm. The fact that you've created something amazing is what counts now. Sometimes, families misinterpret one another. There may be a fresh start tonight. However, smoothing over wasn't the point of the moment for me. Truth was at issue. I glanced at my mom, who had glistening eyes and trembling lips, saying, Tell me honestly. The words pierced the air like a blade. Were you sorry because you hurt me? Or were you sorry because you didn't know I was successful? Both, she muttered after opening and closing her lips. I sat back and looked at her. Her tears fell freely as she said, Which matters more? Not including you. What I regret most is that, not your triumph, I just forgot that you were my daughter first and foremost. Something inside of me shattered at the admission. I briefly saw a mother who was aware of the harm she had caused, rather than the image-obsessed lady who was trying desperately to win over her brother. But uncertainty persisted. Had the truth not been revealed in such a stunning way, how would she have felt that regret dessert came up? Cinnamon, gelato, and pumpkin tartlets. But the sweetness simply brought out the harshness in the air. The conversation flowed uncomfortably. The room lost its previous bluster. Mom reached beneath the table and gripped my hand during a pause. Her hold was tentative but sincere, whispering, I'm proud of you. Evelyn, she said. I looked into her eyes and tried to find sincerity. Not for the money, for the strength, for never giving up, even when I didn't believe in you. I thought I saw it for the first time. I did. However, hold her hand softly. Prove it, I whispered. She nodded as her tears began to flow more quickly. Don't just say it tonight because Robert's listening. Prove it when no one else is watching. The battle lines had loosened by the time coffee was served. Despite their hesitancy, my siblings inquired about my employment in passing. Dad's pride and remorse mixed together as he gazed at me. And my remarks were like lifelines to Mom, who was quiet and reserved. However, underneath the delicate fragment, I was aware that the night was not yet finished. One confession was insufficient to heal the scars that Thanksgiving dinner had revealed. I saw my reflection in the Bellows' gleaming glass doors as we were leaving the table. My chin up, my posture straight. I wasn't invisible for once. The family had finally been forced to see me for who I really was. What they would do with that fact, however, was a matter for another time. Long after the hubbub had subsided, I stayed awake the night following Thanksgiving, reliving every word and every look that passed across that table. The meal itself was wonderful. Each meal arrived like a piece of art, and Bella's crew carried it out with the grace I requested. Emotions, however, had woven themselves into a web too tight to overlook underneath the meal's beauty. My mother's face, when she expressed remorse, was still visible to me, without the typical protective shield of pride. Her voice was raw. I wanted to trust her. For once, I wanted to think she had noticed me. Despite looks, however, a part of me that was older, hurt, and had doubts still felt regret if Uncle Robert hadn't been there. Observing, listening, and comparing our family to his own. Ashley phoned early the next morning. She sounded uncertain. as if she were treading gingerly on a thin layer of ice. "I'm delighted you were there. Evelyn. Even if last night was so stressful. Very happy. Are you?" I asked quietly. "Yes," she firmly replied. "I am aware that we have allowed you to get thus far by yourself. We ought to have cared more and asked more questions. I apologize for it." I was comforted by her comments, but they were tinged with guilt. Despite her quiet nature, my sister had always been nice. She had never stood up for me or questioned Mom's story. Nevertheless, it seemed like a hesitant rebuilding of a bridge to hear her apologies. Michael sent a brief message later that day. "You did a good job. Well done." Not much more. Even that reluctant recognition was more than he had ever given me before. Yet his pride prevented him from saying what needed to be said. But the sound that reverberated the most was my mother's quiet. She didn't give a call. She didn't send a text. I couldn't tell whether she was overwhelmed or humiliated. She just vanished into the silence of her home. Days went by. Work took over my life once again. The never-ending machinery of the restaurant industry. Christmas parties to plan, and catering agreements to complete. However, there was a pull under the surface that I couldn't ignore. Something had been broken open by the food. But cracks that are left untreated either spread or heal. I had to find out which one it would be. I took a car to my parents' residence a week later. The traces of fall were still visible on the front yard, like lost confetti. Leaves were strewn everywhere. The scent of cinnamon candles, and something older and heavier, like unsaid words, filled the air within. Mom was in the kitchen, folding laundry at the counter. Her movements mechanical. When she saw me, she stopped breathing. "Evelyn," she said in a whisper, with my heart racing. I put my suitcase down. "We need to talk," she said, nodding, her eyes sparkling. "I know." We sat at the kitchen table. The same table where I had once done homework, where she had once scolded me for grades that weren't good enough, where silence had been louder than praise. "Why didn't you call?" I inquired, because I was at a loss for words. She twisted the cloth on her lap. That night, everything I said sounded incorrect. "I didn't want to harm you anymore." "You already did," I whispered softly. "You made me feel inferior to my siblings for years, as if the things I was constructing weren't important." Tears streamed down her face. I was wrong. I had assumed that success had to look like a law degree, a family, or something that could be easily explained at dinner parties. Her candor shocked me. I had pleaded in silence for her recognition for years. And now that it had finally arrived, I didn't feel triumph. I asked, "Do you know what hurt most?" She looked up. What she said, "As you never asked what my work really was. You never asked how I was surviving. You never asked if I was happy. You just assumed I was failing." She covered her mouth with her hand and sobbed quietly. It was grief for the years wasted, the years unloved. She nodded fiercely, holding my hand. And I said, "They will. I promise." That promise became the seed of something new. And over the next few months, she started to show up. Not with judgment, but with curiosity. I know. And I hate myself for it. I reached across the table, hesitated, and then laid my hand over hers. During the day, she came to Bella's to meet my staff and ask questions about menu planning and supply chains. Her inquiries were awkward and clumsy at first, but she gradually started to get the concept, and she even helped out at our charity dinner by serving food to families who had nothing. One evening, after a long day of service, I drove her home, and in the silence of the car, she said, "I used to tell myself I wanted to protect you from disappointment." I saw her humbled for the first time, moved by the weight of lives outside her own image. but I was still unsure, was she proud because she finally saw me, or because she finally had something to brag about? In actuality, however, it was me who was let down. Her voice broke. I don't want to lose you again. Evelyn, I'm disappointed that you weren't what I expected. And that was my failure. Not yours. With tears in my eyes, I dragged the vehicle to the curb and said, "Tell me what I can do to make this right." She nodded and reached for my hand, saying, "Just be my mother. Not my judge. Not my critic. Just my mother." For the first time in years, I let her hold it. But a shadow persisted despite the renewed hope. Families don't change overnight. Patterns create deep grooves that take time to climb out of like an art. I wasn't sure if we could ever erase the years of dismissal. But perhaps we could start over, and for the first time in a long time, I felt a cautious serenity as I stood at the window of my apartment that night. Alone. Staring out over the city. Watching lights flicker over the skyline. Bright and alive. I had demanded truth at that Thanksgiving table. And I had gotten it painful. Flawed. But real. 6 months passed like pages in a book, with each chapter representing a cautious step towards something new between my mother and me. At first, I expected her attention to wane. That once the luster of my revelation faded, she would revert to her old ways, clinging to Ashley's family stories and Michael's courtroom victories. But to my surprise, she didn't. The question that lingered was whether the truth would be enough to build something lasting, or whether it was just a fragile truce waiting to break. She frequently visited Bella's as a guest who genuinely wanted to understand, rather than as a patron who demanded special treatment. She inquired about the menu, how I sourced ingredients, and even staffing issues. And she lingered in the kitchen to watch the chefs at work, marveling at the choreography of it all. The pride she had once reserved for appearances melted into something softer and more grounded. And for the first time I saw her moved not by what other people would say, but by what she was truly witnessing when she volunteered at our charity gala, serving plates of roasted chicken to families who had nothing. This is my daughter, Evelyn, who owns Thompson Culinary Holdings, 7 restaurants, 2 catering companies, and 3 Michelin stars. Her words were glowing, practiced, almost too polished. And I wondered if she was proud of me, or proud of what I had become to others. Nevertheless, the doubt never completely left me. Her voice carried an air of triumph every time she introduced me to someone new. "Evelyn," she said tentatively, "I've been thinking a lot about that night. Thanksgiving. About how I excluded you." We sat together at Bella's bar one evening after a late service. The restaurant had been cleared out, the air thick with the lingering smell of wine and garlic. She sipped tea while I unwound with a glass of water. She swallowed hard as I continued to stare at the glass in my hands. "It wasn't about you." I knew now. It was about me and my anxiety that you would make me seem insignificant in comparison to Robert's kids. I let that fear to control everything, because I was shallow. I shall live the rest of my life regretting it. I was stung by her candor. I looked for signs of dishonesty, but all I found was weakness. Nevertheless, I asked the question that had been bothering me. Would you regret leaving me out even if I hadn't succeeded and had been barely making ends meet with a food truck? She had tears welling up in her eyes. Yes. Because I didn't include my daughter on my resume or my net worth. I almost fell apart at the simplicity of what she said. Love, tested in success, is easy. So even though I wanted to trust her, a part of me was still holding back. Failure is a test of love. Truth is proven by that. Little things during the months gave me hope. She no longer started by inquiring about profit margins. Rather, she inquired as to whether I was getting enough sleep, eating enough, and enjoying the pandemonium She went to Michael's legal lectures and Ashley's children's soccer matches with the same fervor she used to save for bragging rights. It was as if she was now realizing that presence was more important than brilliance. However, the query persisted in my mind. Was this only another performance? Or was this a true change aimed at me this time? Our yearly charity dinner was held at Bella's as spring turned into summer. I gave my mother an apron, and she wore it when she came early. Faces flushed with eagerness. Hair pulled back. She joked with kids, spoke to volunteers, and carried trays. I once saw her across the room, pride shining in her beautiful Polish eyes as she watched me. It was unadulterated. I allowed myself to breathe in that instant. She drew me aside while we were closing the restaurant later that evening. "Evelyn," she replied, firmly holding my hand. Something that had been stoned for years softened as she said, "Thank you for letting me in, for giving me another chance. I don't deserve it, but I want to earn it every day." Nevertheless, I was unable to stop the notion that kept running through my mind as I laid in bed later and stared at the ceiling. Individuals evolve. But do they ever completely transform? Or do they just pick up a new part to play? I recalled her shaky hands as she confessed her humiliation at that Thanksgiving meal. I recalled how, in an attempt to keep her face intact, her eyes darted to Robert. And I thought back to the previous years when she had evaluated my value based on what other people thought of me. In all honesty, I had no idea if she loved me for who I was, or whether she had just substituted pride for disappointment. Perhaps. However, I understood that was sufficient for now. Because her perfection wasn't the most important thing, she put out the effort. We began telling stories about the Thanksgiving feast at Bellis, a kind of family legend. My siblings laughed as they recounted it, ignoring the hurt and focusing solely on the dramatic discovery. It was amusement for them. It was something more profound. A turning moment that was both sad and freeing for me. I had entered the room undetectable and left without a trace. I now listened cautiously and patiently whenever my mother boasted about me. I learned not to live for her approval since the biggest change that night wasn't hers. Rather, it was mine. At times, it made me angry. And at other times, it made me feel comfortable. I didn't need their approval anymore. I had stated the truth, and I had shown my abilities. They were unable to quiet. I learned a lot about desire, leadership, and sacrifice from success. But I learned more from my family. Not wrongly enhancing others is that true strength. It involves being true to who you are, whether or not others acknowledge it. Even now, my mom still boasts about spending Thanksgiving at Bellis. She explains to everyone how her daughter started a truck business and now runs the restaurant. Perhaps she does it in part to improve her image. Perhaps she always will. Beneath it, however, I've seen her calmer times, helping at events, and listening rather than rejecting, or developing the ability to say, "I'm proud of you," without requiring a crowd. That may be atonement. Or perhaps it is really another delusion. In any case, I no longer need to be selected to know that I belong. Therefore, I've given up waiting for assurance.